It's time to make your sentences in Greek a little more complex. What we're going to add here is indirect statement. Most of what you've been dealing with is direct statement. That is, you've made direct statements with the indicative. So I could say, the army is marching. This is a direct statement. Right? We've got a subject, we've got a verb. I'm saying it directly. Indirectly, though, if we change this, an indirect statement is sometimes called oratio obliqua or indirect discourse. And we could say this, the army is marching, indirectly by saying, he says that the army is marching. In so doing, I'm taking this original direct statement and I'm putting it in the mouth of somebody else. And I do that by using a head verb, a verb of thinking or saying. In English, we use that, and then we repeat the direct statement, the army is marching. In Greek, this is going to be a little different. There's actually 3 ways to do it in Greek. The way I'm going to introduce to you now is by using an accusative and infinitive. The accusative is going to represent the original subject, and the infinitive is going to represent the verb, and there will be no word for that. So we're going to leave that out. We're going to have a head verb, and we're going to have an accusative and infinitive. So let's take a look at how this might work. So one of the most common words you're going to run into is nomidzo, to think. I'll introduce another very common word that's going to introduce an accusative infinitive construction at the end of this lesson. But the one we're going to use here is nomidzo, to think. Ho aner nomidze ten stration stratuen. The man thinks that the army is marching. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that stratuen is a present infinitive. And so we use the present. It represents a present action. That is, it's taking place at the same time as the verb. So the army is marching. He thinks that the army is marching. In the second sentence, ho aner nomidze ten stratian stratusai, notice this is an aorist infinitive. So the man thinks that the army was marching. So in indirect statement, the tense of the verb really does refer to a certain extent to tense, that is to time. I'm going to mention in a little bit that it's actually relative time, it's not absolute time, but think of it as stratusai here has a past tense idea to it. So the man thinks that the army was marching. And then finally, ho aner nomie, let's keep with the present tense there, nomidze, ten stratian stratusen, there's a future infinitive. The man thinks that the army will march. So in indirect statement, in each of these, we've got an accusative, and we've got an infinitive. We've got a verb of the head. We've got no word for that. We have to insert that into our English translation. And the tenses actually matter this time. It's not just about aspect, it's actually about time. But as I mentioned, it's about relative time. So the present tense represents simultaneous action. That is, action that is taking place at the same time as the main verb, as the head verb. The aorist is going to represent completed action, as action in the past in relation to the main verb, the head verb, and the future is going to represent action not yet done. Right? Action in the future in relationship to the main verb. This may be easier to see in action here. So in this first sentence, ho aner nomidze ten stratian stratuen, our main verb is present tense. We've got a present infinitive. Remember, present is simultaneous. So the man thinks that the army is marching. These two actions, the thinking and the marching, are taking place at the same time. If we change that main verb to past tense, the man was thinking that the army was marching. Here we have still the present. So he was thinking that the army was marching. The marching is happening at the same time as the thinking. Only in this case, the thinking is taking place in the past. And we could go to the future. Ho aner nomie, ten stratian stratuein. Future. The man will think that the army is marching. So here, although we translate these the same way, stratuein and stratuein, this really represents future marching because the thinking is still in the future. Right? So we have to consider that the present is always taking place at the same time as the main verb. What if we change it to a future? Right? Now we'll go future tenses. The man thinks, present tense, that the army will march. So I'll go back here. So the man thinks that the army is marching. The man thought that the army was marching. The man will think that the army will march or is marching, will be marching. Here with the future infinitive, the man thinks that the army will march. Past tense main verb, the man thought, was thinking that the army would be marching. And with the future, the man will think that the army will march. But in the future in relationship to this future thinking. Now if we use an aorist, so present tense main verb but an aorist infinitive, the man thinks that the army marched. The man was thinking that the army had marched. The man will think that the army has marched, where the aorist is completed in relationship to the main verb. So you'll notice, if we take a look at each of these three sets, that even though the infinitive is the same in each of these three sets, that we're going to translate them slightly differently because it's relative time, not absolute time. Now, one last note. The most common verb that you're going to find with an accusative and accusative infinitive indirect discourse is fημί, to say. It's an irregular verb. So in the present, here this first column is the present. Fημί, face, facey, famen, fate, facin. Notice the stem shifts from an eta to an alpha, from singular to plural. Right? Otherwise, there's some similarities there, and as you go on in your Greek learning, you'll see these endings aren't actually all that odd, nor is the shift between the long and the short version of the vowels. So the present, and then the imperfect, he was saying. These are the two main tenses of this verb, the two tenses of this verb, in fact. Ephein, epheista, or ephes, ephe, ephamen, ephate, ephasan. So if you remember your forms of amī in the imperfect, these are going to be very similar. They've all got an epsilon augment, and there's also that shift between the eta in the singular and the alpha in the plural. So memorize these forms. Oh, and I should add, there is an infinitive, phani. Again, this ending later will become much more clear. It's not irregular. But memorize these forms, and you'll be much happier as you continue on in your Greek education.